In 1927, a British battleship was launched that made everyone who looked at her uncomfortable. Her design was wrong, her guns were in the wrong place, her shape was unlike anything else in the fleet. Naval officers called her ungainly, foreign navies called her ugly. The men who built her rivals said she would never be a proper fighting ship. 14 years later, she helped destroy the most feared battleship Germany ever put to sea. This is the story of HMS Rodney. To understand why Rodney looked so strange, you need to understand the world she was built in. After the First World War, the great naval powers signed a treaty limiting how big and how powerful their warships could be. Britain was given a weight limit. Her designers had a choice: spread that weight across the whole ship the normal way, or concentrate it in a way nobody had tried before. They chose to put all three of her main gun turrets at the front of the ship, one behind the other, pointing forward. No capital ship had ever been built quite like it. It made her look stubby and unbalanced, like she was leaning forward into the water. But it also meant her 9 16-inch guns, the biggest ever fitted to a British warship, could all be aimed at a target ahead of her at the same time. On paper it was clever. In practice it looked like a mistake. She was slow, she was odd-shaped, and nobody loved her. But those 9 guns were real, and they were enormous. Rodney spent most of the 1930s doing what unwanted ships do. She was used for training, for showing the flag, for being available when something needed a big hull in a particular stretch of water. She was never the Navy's first choice for anything. Newer, sleeker ships got the prestigious postings. By the time war broke out in 1939, she was already considered old. Her machinery was worn. She was slow by wartime standards, barely able to make 23 knots when she was new. Less than that now. There were real questions about whether she could keep up with a modern fleet action at all. The Navy kept her busy anyway, because war does not let you retire the ships you don't like. She escorted convoys. She intercepted German supply routes. She was torpedoed by a German submarine in 1939 and survived. She kept going, slow and stubborn, doing the work nobody else wanted. On the morning of the 24th of May 1941, everything changed. HMS Hood, the most beloved ship in the Royal Navy, the ship Britain had called unsinkable for 20 years, was gone. 3 minutes and 3 survivors. The Bismarck, Germany's newest and most powerful battleship, had done what nobody believed possible, and now she was loose in the Atlantic with her guns still intact and a whole ocean to disappear into. Winston Churchill gave one order: sink her. Every available ship in the Royal Navy was pulled toward the hunt, and that included Rodney, the slow, outdated battleship nobody had ever quite trusted. She had been on her way to America for a refit. That trip was cancelled. She turned around and joined the search. For 3 days, Bismarck ran, and the Royal Navy chased. She was found, she was lost, she was found again. Aircraft from the carrier Ark Royal attacked her with torpedoes in the dark and damaged her rudder, leaving her steering in circles in the heavy Atlantic swell, unable to run, unable to maneuver properly, surrounded by enemies closing in from every direction. Rodney was one of those enemies. She had been at sea for days, her crew exhausted. Her engines pushed harder than they had been pushed in years. She was not supposed to be fast enough to catch a modern German battleship under normal circumstances. Bismarck's damaged rudder had made the circumstances anything but normal. At 8:47 in the morning on the 27th of May 1941, Rodney opened fire. She was alongside King George V, the Royal Navy's newest battleship, and together they closed on a Bismarck that could no longer run. What followed was not a battle in the traditional sense. It was a systematic destruction. Rodney's 9 16-inch shells began finding their mark almost immediately. Within minutes, Bismarck's forward turrets were knocked out. Her bridge was destroyed. Her fire control systems went silent one by one. The ship that had killed Hood in 3 minutes was being taken apart piece by piece, and she could no longer effectively fight back. Rodney did something during this fight that naval officers still talk about. She closed to a range of less than 4 miles from Bismarck, closer than battleships were ever supposed to get to each other, well inside the range where even a damaged enemy could land a devastating hit. At that distance, her 16-inch shells were not just hitting Bismarck, they were going straight through her. Some passed through the ship entirely before exploding. The damage they caused below the waterline was catastrophic. She also fired her torpedoes. A battleship firing torpedoes at another battleship was almost unheard of. Torpedoes were a destroyer's weapon, not a capital ship's. One of Rodney's torpedoes hit. It was the only time in recorded history that one battleship successfully torpedoed another in combat. Here is what made this fight remarkable beyond just the firepower involved. Bismarck, despite everything being thrown at her, refused to go down quickly. Her crew was fighting damage control below decks while the ship above them was being destroyed. Her hull was tough enough to absorb a punishment that would have finished most ships in minutes. By 9:30 in the morning, Bismarck was on fire from end to end. Her guns were silent. She was listing heavily, and she was still floating. Survivors from Bismarck's crew, who were later rescued, described what was happening inside the ship during this time. The upper decks were unrecognizable. Fires burned in compartments that no longer had walls. Men who had been at their action stations when the shooting started were gone. And yet below the waterline, in the deep machinery spaces and the damage control parties working in the dark, men were still alive, still trying to keep the ship together, still doing their jobs even as the world above them ceased to exist. Rodney and King George V kept firing. Cruisers closed in and added their own shells. The sea around Bismarck was white with explosions, and still she stayed on the surface, battered and broken but not yet gone. At around 10:20 in the morning, Bismarck finally rolled over and sank. Whether she went down from the shelling or from scuttling charges set by her own crew is still debated by historians. Both sides of that argument have evidence. What is not in dispute is that she was gone, and that Rodney's guns had played a central role in putting her there. For the crew of Rodney, the slow, outdated, unloved ship that nobody had wanted for the hard jobs, it was the moment that defined everything. They had found Hood's killer. They had helped finish her. The fight was not without consequences for Rodney. Firing her enormous guns at close range for nearly 90 minutes had done serious damage to her own structure. The shock of repeated full broadsides cracked internal fittings, buckled deck plating, and shook loose equipment throughout the ship. Her already worn machinery had been pushed past its limits. She went to America for that refit after all, though weeks later than planned. She never quite recovered her full capability. She served for the rest of the war at Normandy, in the Mediterranean, doing the work that needed a big hull and heavy guns, but she was never again the ship she had been before that morning in the Atlantic. By 1945 she was in poor condition. Years of heavy use and the structural damage from the Bismarck fight had left her worn out in ways that were expensive to fix and harder to justify now that the war was over. The Navy that had never quite loved her looked at the repair bills and made the calculation that most old warships eventually face. She was paid off in 1946 and placed in reserve, waiting for a decision that everyone already knew was coming. In 1948 she was sold for scrap. The ship that had helped kill Bismarck was broken apart at a yard in Inverkeithing, Scotland. Her steel melted down and recycled. It took over a year to fully dismantle her. Her anchors, some of her fittings, and pieces of her structure were kept as mementos, scattered across museums and collections in Britain. One of her 16-inch gun barrels was preserved. A small number of artifacts survive to this day in various collections. The physical remains of a ship that once shook the Atlantic with her guns. Not a glamorous ending for a ship that had done what she did. But Rodney was never about glamour. She had been the wrong shape, the wrong speed, the wrong everything, right up until the moment she wasn't. The ugly, slow, rule-breaking battleship that nobody loved had outlasted the ships they built to replace her, outlasted the enemies sent to sink her, and when the moment came that Britain needed every gun it could find pointed at the ship that killed Hood, Rodney was there. She had always been there. That was the thing about Rodney. She was never the favourite. She was just always there when it mattered.